Hey, sophomores. Let's take a few minutes and I want to tell you about Sir Thomas Gray and a little bit about his elegy written in a country churchyard. Sir Thomas Gray lived between 1716 and 1771. And just a couple of quick things about him to note. He kept what was good in neoclassic tradition. He had an excellent use of personification. He loved the high-flown allusions, and he used a very conventional diction. He also then went on to explore some new ideas. He was interested in country life. He talked about humble people for the first time. He brought emotion back into poetry. He used the first person, and he indicated an interest in the past, which are all traits that are going to be indicative of the coming romantics. An elegy is a poem that mourns the death of a person or laments something that's lost. It can also be considered a meditation on the nature of death. We'll see how that definition applies to this poem. Gray kind of reluctantly published this poem anonymously after hearing of an uncouth publisher who was threatening to publish his work even though he didn't want it to be. Gray was extremely private with his writings. Publishing was a painful experience that always came with a fame that he really didn't want. Elegy written in a country churchyard is divided into 7 sections. The first 4 are just deal with the setting of the poem. Then the second section imagines the life of the rude forefathers, rude meaning uneducated, primitive, simple. Again, this poem is about the common everyday man more than somebody of political or social importance. His third section talks about the idea of death, which he saw as a common end to all. The fourth section addresses the unused potential of some of the villagers. The fifth section then ventures into a desire of even the lowliest to be remembered. It doesn't matter whether we're rich and famous or an everyday person. We all want to be remembered when we're gone. The sixth section then moves into the speaker's anticipation of his own death. And the final section is an epitaph of the speaker written by the poet himself. The setting of this poem takes place at dusk within a country churchyard or a cemetery. This is going to add to the symbolic nature of the poem, the setting of the sun in one's own life. We're going to see an owl who depicts those who are intruded upon by the daily life of the outside world. Here she hears the beetles' droning flight, the cowbells, both of which are reminders of kind of the hurried quality of modern life. The cemetery is going to be described as a narrow cell that houses the bodies of those who once lived in this hamlet, this little town. Then Gray moves into kind of his imagined life of the villagers. He addresses the elements of a typical day within this hamlet, this little town, which consists of the following: waking to the sounds of the birds and the rooster crowing, a mother tending the hearth fire and cleaning the house, the father working to earn a living only to be welcomed home by his children at the end of the day. It's a picture of domestic bliss and solitude. It is also a picture that is no more. The section dealing with a common end for all reminds us that this poem is being written about the anonymous poor who lived in this rural existence. The poet stresses that all mankind is united in death. When we get there, look at line 36. And this is a thematic issue within the work. We all share a common end, the grave. Just as the soul cannot return to the body, the mansion cannot call the fleeting breath back home. Death is final. While exploring the villagers' unused potential, Gray states that talent or virtue is wasted if it isn't seen by the public. He implies that the unknown poor may have been the next revolutionary thinkers. Look for allusions to Milton and Cromwell. But due to the circumstances of birth, they're forced to remain unfulfilled. The Restoration's class and social system underscored the unused potential of this time. The haves were allowed to pursue their dreams of education, while the have-nots were forced to speculate on how their lives could have or should have been. He then moves into the desire of the lowliest to be remembered. The country poor wish and deserve to be remembered. Gray emphasizes that they teach a moral lesson to the living on how to die with dignity. Everyone, regardless of social standing or position, expects to be remembered and mourned by their loved ones. And the tone of this section is mournful, sad, you could also call it nostalgic, because each death is important to the loved one's family. Each life matters. All humanity should grieve for those who are lost to death. As we get to the end of the poem, we find the speaker anticipating his own death. The poem is commemorating the unhonored dead who unwittingly participate in the artless tale of life and death. The lines of this poem reverence the lives of many that time has passed into anonymity. In stanza 25, we have a new speaker who is employed to speak about the young poet in the remaining 8 stanzas. This speaker is unidentified to highlight the obscurity of the dead. As he walks among the cemetery, the young poet recites his verse, rests beside the river, and exhibits a lonely and troubled nature, until one morning he too passes into the arms of death. And that brings us to the epitaph. The epitaph at the end of this work is created for Thomas Gray by Thomas Gray. He remarks upon his merits and frailties as they alike serve to represent the story of his life. The inspiration for this work is linked to Gray's greatest tragedy, the death of his best friend, Richard West, at the age of 24 from tuberculosis.